The North Sea in winter always carries a strange beauty. Cold winds blow in from the open water, bringing with them the salty tang of the sea and the dank, humid smell of decaying seaweed. Under the pale yellow light of the Bremerhaven lighthouse, the water ripples quietly, as if hiding something. Early on the morning of March 1st, 2022, a man was walking his dog along the Weather River. He thought the day would be like any other, until the dog barked, fixated on something wedged between the rocks. It was a suitcase, caked in mud and unusually heavy. When the suitcase was pulled up, the lid snapped open, and what was inside was something the man would never forget. Black plastic bags, tightly sealed with tape, and a sharp metallic odor rising violently in the cold wind. Just a few hours later, when the forensic results were released, all of Germany was shaken. Inside the suitcase were parts of a woman's body. Her name was Ekaterina Baumann, 32 years old. What had happened to her? Every tragic story begins with a moment that seems, perfect. For Ekaterina, that moment unfolded in the summer of 2009, when she was just 20, a young Russian woman, freshly out of university on vacation in Turkey with her family. She didn't know that this trip would shape her entire fate. On a small beach in Antalya, she met Walter. He was 13 years older, average build, ordinary face, a bit unkempt but soft-spoken. Walter was born in Kazakhstan but had settled in Germany from a young age. Although he held German citizenship, he spoke fluent Russian, and perhaps that was what helped them find each other so easily in a foreign country. Ekaterina had never loved anyone before. Walter, on the other hand, was a solitary man who spent most of his time in his parents' house, endlessly searching for the perfect woman. He believed marriage was sacred, but also something to be controlled, and when he saw Ekaterina, he believed he had found the angel he had been waiting for. Walter was accustomed to meeting women online, mostly Russians. Once he even flew to Russia to meet an online acquaintance, only to be blocked by her the very next day. They talked by the beach until late about music, about Russia, and about dreams of building a family in a foreign land. Walter appeared thoughtful, mature, so different from men her age. He bought her a small silver necklace, saying it was a lucky charm for those brave enough to love. She smiled, unaware that the very person who gave her that gift would later become the one she feared most in the world. After the vacation, they kept in touch. Hours of online conversations, letters, poems sent back and forth. Walter flew to Russia to visit her, took her out to dinner, and gave her gifts she had never dared to dream of. For a young woman raised in a modest family, it was the first time she felt cherished, loved, and she believed she had met the right man. Perhaps each of us has once believed that love can heal everything, but sometimes love is the very thing that blinds us most. In 2010, Walter helped Ekaterina move to Germany to study at the University of Hamburg. He said distance kills love, and if she truly wanted to be with him, she should choose Germany as home. She agreed. For Ekaterina, it was an act of faith. For Walter, it was a way to bind her. Only 6 months after arriving in Germany, he proposed with a simple ring on the Bremerhaven beach, the place that would later become a symbol of destiny. The wedding took place not long after. White horses, a wedding dress, the sound of waves and sea winds, like a beautiful dream everyone longs for. But when the dream faded, only reality remained. Walter didn't bring her to any warm, cozy home. He brought her to his parents' house, where another woman was waiting. Ludmila, Walter's mother, an intelligent, cold woman whose love for her son had become an obsession. The one who would become the central figure in all the tragedies to come. Ludmila had once been an outstanding chemical engineer in Kazakhstan. Later, she became a high school teacher, known for being strict and principled. People said she had taken part in 25 scientific marine expeditions, including voyages to the Arctic. She had once been the pride of her research institute, someone her colleagues both respected and feared. But in her private life, Ludmila had only one son, Walter. Her love for him wasn't like affection, it was possessiveness. After her husband died, she devoted all her time to Walter. When he went to work, she called nearly every hour asking what he'd eaten, who he was with, when he'd be back. And when Ekaterina appeared, that love turned into blind jealousy. At first, Ekaterina tried to do everything well. She helped Ludmila cook, clean, and arrange flowers in the living room. She called her mama, the Russian way to show respect. But no matter what she did, she was met only with cold stares. Ludmila scrutinized every detail. If Ekaterina laughed too much, she called her improper. If she dressed nicely, she said she was showing off. If she stayed quiet, she accused her of being fake. In that house, love wasn't spoken, only orders and judgment. Walter, as usual, chose silence. He didn't defend his wife, nor did he oppose his mother. Whenever Ekaterina felt hurt, he would only say, "You should understand my mother sacrificed her whole life for me. Endure a little, everything will be fine." But fine never came. The more time passed, the more Ludmila saw her daughter-in-law as an enemy. And Ekaterina, the once radiant bride by the lighthouse, now lived in a house full of reproach. Walter was different. His job meant he was rarely home, but that didn't bring Ekaterina any relief. Each time he returned, the atmosphere grew heavy. He was the kind of man who believed everything at home had to go his way. He worked relentlessly, saved every penny, and always said, "We don't need luxury, just discipline." Before their child was born, Walter used part of his savings to buy a house of their own, but Ludmila still interfered in their lives as before. Ekaterina understood that discipline in Walter's dictionary meant control. He didn't want her going out alone, didn't want her having friends, and even checked her phone whenever she texted. But what hurt most was invisibility. She felt like a stranger in her own home. They also often ate at his parents' house, as if it were a habit they couldn't break. By 2017, after 7 years together, Ekaterina became pregnant. She believed the child would bring new light to their marriage. She thought that once they had a baby, Walter would be gentler and Ludmila would change. But she was wrong. When the baby girl was born, Ludmila seemed to come alive again. She seized control of caring for the child, deciding everything from clothes and food to language. She forbade the child from speaking German, saying, "We are Russian. We must keep our roots." Walter fully agreed, and Ekaterina, the real mother, was pushed out of the circle of love. There are people who don't beat you, but they break you by stripping away the meaning of your existence. Night after night, Ekaterina lay in a small room, listening to her mother-in-law's footsteps downstairs. She didn't dare cry loudly, only bit her lip so the baby wouldn't wake. She began to dream of St. Petersburg, her hometown where family and friends were, and where she once laughed without fear. But now Russia was too far away, And in that cold house, a woman was slowly disappearing, not because of death, but because of silence stretched to infinity. Violence doesn't come only from fists. It also comes from the way people force you to be silent. Day by day, bit by bit, Walter was busier than ever. He worked almost day and night, rarely taking weekends or holidays. He always said it was for the family's future. But Ekaterina knew it was just his way of avoiding things, avoiding conversations, avoiding emotions, and avoiding her. Each month, Walter earned more than 4,000 euros. But he didn't spend on anyone but himself. He kept every expense in a ledger, counted every little bill. Even when Ekaterina wanted to buy something small for their child, he frowned. No need to waste money. My mother still has old things. In Walter's eyes, everything was property, including people. He saw his wife as part of the house, meant to be there to be silent and not to deviate from her assigned role. Since their daughter's birth, Ekaterina had almost lost her sense of self. Every day she juggled childcare, housework, and enduring reproach. Her mother-in-law was still there, Ludmila, always watching, commenting, and correcting every tiny detail of how she mothered. She wasn't allowed to teach the child German, only Russian. Walter said, "Germans don't need to know who my child is. My child is Russian." And so, Ekaterina was isolated between two worlds, no longer belonging to Russia and never truly becoming part of Germany. One autumn day in 2019, as the first leaves fell into the yard, Walter lost control. The anger came quickly, over something trivial. A dish, not to his liking, a poorly phrased sentence. He hit her. Not hard, but enough to scare her. For the first time, Ekaterina understood that her silence would no longer keep the peace. It was killing her. She went to the police. For the first time in years, she dared to speak about what happened in that house. The abuse, the control, and the nightly fear. German police opened a file, documented her case, and sent social workers to meet her. They offered help, a safe shelter. But when facing Walter, the man she once loved, she trembled again. She didn't dare say more, only gently shook her head and said, "We've reconciled." That is the tragedy of many abused women. They believe that if they endure a little longer, people will change. But violence never appreciates forgiveness. Walter was different. He knew his wife had reported him, and that made him want to control her even more. He installed eavesdropping software on her phone, checked her messages, and told others that Ekaterina was mentally unstable, unwell, unfit to be a mother. He wanted everyone to believe that if anything was wrong in that house, it was her fault. Ekaterina began to panic. She grew afraid even hearing Walter's footsteps in the hallway. She feared her mother-in-law's gaze, feared the sound of a key turning in the lock each night. By early 2020, she couldn't take it anymore. While Walter was at work, Ekaterina packed a few belongings, took her daughter, and fled. She went to a local women's and children's protection center that specialized in helping victims of domestic violence. There she heard stories like her own, and for the first time she felt less alone. But when Walter found out, he quit work, rushed to the center, fell to his knees before her and said, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I can't live without you. I swear I'll never hurt you again." She looked at him, the man who had caused her so much pain, now crying like a child. And in that weak moment, she forgave him. She returned. Not out of love, but for their daughter, who needed a father. In toxic relationships, the weakest person isn't the one who endures, but the one who still believes the promise, "I will change." Walter did change, at least for the first few months. He bought flowers, cooked, even apologized whenever they argued. Ekaterina began to believe things might be different. She spoke to her mother in Russia more, saying, "Things are getting better?" She didn't know that this peace was only the lull before the storm. Walter had learned to hide his anger, not to let it go. The year 2020 ended in exhaustion. Ekaterina still tried to cling to the belief that she could fix things, that if she was gentler, softer, the family would be less cold. But that belief was slowly draining the life out of her. There are houses without shouting, yet they are places where a person's soul is slowly worn down, day after day, by silence. In the evenings, the two of them would have dinner and talk gently, something they hadn't done in a long time. For Ekaterina, it was a glimmer of hope. She believed perhaps their daughter would have a complete family. From then on, each time Ekaterina went back to Russia, Walter would go too, something he had rarely bothered with before. But then, the same cycle repeated. The old anger returned, only this time, more quietly, harder to detect. Walter gradually went back to his controlling habits. Every time Ekaterina went out, he asked where she was going, with whom, when she would return. She wasn't free to spend money, couldn't buy new clothes. If she went to visit Russia, he said it was a waste of money. If she called her mother, he acted annoyed. She felt herself being pulled back into a cage, this time an invisible one. She knew that if she stayed, sooner or later, things would get worse. And Ekaterina began quietly preparing for divorce. She gathered documents, wrote the petition, and hid them in a secret drawer. But in that house, no secret was truly safe. One evening while she was away, her mother-in-law Ludmila found everything. She took all the files and disappeared with them. When Ekaterina discovered this, Ludmila only looked at her with an icy gaze. "No one divorces my son." From then on, family conflicts became public. Ekaterina was kicked out of the house after a heated argument. She had to call the police and temporarily stay with friends. But a few days later, she still returned for her daughter. Another time, right at the kindergarten, she and Walter had a loud argument in front of the teachers. The situation was serious enough that Child Protective Services got involved. After assessment, they concluded that neither parent was fit to care for the child, and the child was placed in temporary welfare care. That decision felt like a knife to Ekaterina's heart. She collapsed. For days afterward, she said only one thing: "I just want to take my child back to Russia, where no one can take her from me." But German law didn't allow it. To leave the country, she needed the father's signature, and Walter refused. The door to freedom closed completely. In August 2021, after a fierce argument, Ekaterina fled once more. She went to the Women's and Children's Protection Center as she had 2 years earlier. This time, she brought only a few clothes, a little cash, and a small photo of her daughter. The shelter was far away, dozens of kilometers from her daughter's kindergarten. Each morning, she traveled for hours just to see her child for a few minutes. By year's end, exhausted, she decided to return to Walter's house. Not out of forgiveness, but because she had nowhere else to go. But everything had changed. They lived together but were no longer husband and wife. Each person moved like a ghost in the house. Even the housekeeper, once loyal to Walter, gradually grew to despise him. Ekaterina understood that if she didn't leave, she would lose herself. At the end of 2021, she made a big decision. She left the child with Walter and returned to Russia alone. It was the first time in years she could breathe freely. In St. Petersburg, she met another man, a pilot from Siberia. He was gentle, calm, a good listener. They met at a small friends gathering, and within weeks, Ekaterina felt alive again. He didn't ask about the past, didn't judge the scars. He simply said, "You deserve to be happy." She burst into tears as if hearing something that hadn't been said to her in a very long time. In January 2022, Ekaterina flew back to Germany, not for Walter, but for her daughter. She brought small gifts, warm clothes, and loving messages for the pilot in Russia. The first days passed peacefully. She called him every night, talking about their child, the weather, the meals she cooked. Her voice was light, full of hope. No one knew those were the last peaceful days of her life. Sometimes the light appears right before the night falls, and people only realize it was light when it's too late. February 2022, Germany was freezing. On a small street in Bremerhaven, snow melted slowly under dim streetlights. Ekaterina kept her habit of taking walks each afternoon, her white coat and yellow dress fluttering in the wind. Neighbors remembered her gentle smile, the young, soft-spoken Russian woman. That day was Friday, February 4th, 2022. It was also the last day anyone saw her alive. Around 4:30 p.m., a neighbor's security camera recorded Ekaterina walking around the neighborhood. She returned home at about 6:30 to have dinner with her husband and daughter. They drank red wine and didn't talk much. It could have been a normal dinner, or perhaps the last. Afterward, Ekaterina went upstairs and opened her computer. At 7:41 p.m., her phone was active for the last time. Half an hour later, at 8:25, she video called her lover in Russia, the pilot from Siberia. He later recounted that she smiled brightly that day, saying she'd call back after putting the child to bed. That was the last time he saw her. Then she vanished. 2 days later, her family in St. Petersburg couldn't reach her. Messages went unread, her phone inactive. The lover in Russia began to worry, but no one imagined things would be so terrible. On February 6th, police received a missing person report. They went to Walter's house to question him. He opened the door, face cold. He said, "She often runs away. This time is probably the same." Walter said the last time he saw Ekaterina was the morning of February 5th. She said she was going out to clear her head and didn't return. He added that maybe she hasn't paid her phone bill, which was why no one could contact her. His voice was so calm, it made anyone listening uneasy. But when police searched the house, something was off. Ekaterina's suitcase was still there. Her clothes, phone, keys, and 13,000 euros in cash. Everything was intact. No one runs away leaving everything behind like that. Police grew suspicious. They issued a search order across the state. Civilians, rescue teams, and even sniffer dogs were deployed around the Weather River area. But nothing. She seemed to have disappeared. While the city searched, Walter began repainting the house. He said he wanted brighter colors. But when police returned on February 8th, they found that the entire living room had just been repainted. The floor newly polished. The old sofa replaced with a new one. And the indoor security cameras were gone. In addition, they found a large amount of cleaning agents and some strange scratches on the garage floor, where the smell of chemicals still lingered. Sniffer dogs barked furiously in the garage, but forensic specialists didn't yet find any clear bloodstains or DNA. They only recovered a small knife and a stun gun from Walter's car. These two would later be identified as the murder weapons. Police couldn't file charges yet, but they knew something was being hidden. They put Walter under surveillance. He still went to work, still ate and drank normally, and occasionally even sent messages to his wife's phone as if she were still alive. "Where did you go? Our daughter and I miss you." A feigned message, but enough for him to construct the illusion that Ekaterina had left her family on her own. March 1st, 2022. 25 days after she disappeared. A man was walking his dog along the Weather River. The dog suddenly pulled hard towards something stuck between the rocks, a suitcase covered in algae and mud. When opened, inside were black trash bags, tightly taped shut, and the stench of a corpse flooded the air. Forensic specialists arrived soon after. The results? It was Ekaterina Bauman. The suitcase was found drifting against the current, something nearly impossible, and ironically, it washed up near the lighthouse where, 12 years earlier, Ekaterina and Walter had registered their marriage. The same place, the beginning of love and the end of a life. Perhaps fate only wanted to remind us that every vow comes at a price. Immediately after her identity was confirmed, Walter was arrested. Police returned to his house for the third time, and this time they found things no one could dispute. Right after the suitcase on the Weather River was confirmed to contain Ekaterina's remains, police arrested the only person who could be the key to every question: Walter Bauman. The third search proceeded quietly but decisively. In the garage, forensic experts picked up items that seemed harmless: an empty sedative bottle matching the substance found in the victim's body, disposable gloves, aluminum foil, tape. Next were large garbage bags, bottles of cleaning agents, and a container of acetic acid. In the storage room, they found the red scarf Ekaterina used to wear, along with the key to the suitcase that held her dismembered remains. Forensics also recorded signs of electrical stunning on Ekaterina's body, matching the stun gun found in Walter's car, supporting the hypothesis that the killer used the device to check whether the victim was still alive. Items that seemed disconnected, but when pieced together, they told a story clearer than any testimony, and like a detail that closes the life cycle of memory. All of Ekaterina's personal belongings had disappeared. Walter had thrown everything away. Even the white coat neighbors saw her wearing that final afternoon. While he was in custody, police stumbled on another clue, this time not from the crime scene, but from his mother Ludmila's workplace. In her trash, they found letters Walter had written to his mother. Short lines of pleading: "Only you will understand. Please help me." At first, nobody understood their meaning. But 8 months later, when the investigative pieces were assembled, it became clear. There was a major secret between mother and son. From what they had gathered, police reconstructed Ekaterina's final hours. Friday, February 4th, 2022, was the last day she was alive. A neighbor's camera captured her, walking through the neighborhood at 4:30 p.m. White coat, yellow dress, a peaceful face. At 6:30 p.m., she returned home, had dinner with her husband and daughter, and raised a glass of red wine. At 7:41 p.m., her phone was active for the last time. At 8:25, she video called her lover, the pilot in Russia, cheerful, bright, saying she would call back after putting the child to bed. That was the last living image of her in anyone's eyes. Forensic analysis indicated she died about 2 hours after dinner, right after that call ended. Cause: asphyxiation due to a fractured hyoid bone, a sign of strangulation. Dismemberment tool: a small knife. The next morning at 7:22 a.m., Walter opened his car, likely to transport the body. At 10:22, he left the house. At 4:49 p.m., he returned. All data indicated that this was the time frame in which he disposed of the body. 3 days later, as if to mask the emerging void, Walter called and texted his wife's phone, pretending she was still alive somewhere out there. Police understood this as a desperate attempt to forge a false narrative, a clumsy script by someone who had lost his composure. But one detail drew even more attention. Before Ekaterina disappeared, Walter and his mother exchanged messages daily. From February 4th, the day she died, all contact between them abruptly ceased. A perfect silence, too perfect to be a coincidence. A few days later, while people were still plastering missing posters, Walter calmly took his car to be washed, asking the staff to clean it thoroughly inside and out. Not a speck of dust, not a smear of dirt, as if he were scrubbing away something deeper than blood. While the community prayed for Ekaterina's safety, her husband was busy erasing the last fragments of memory. Some people don't need to lie. Their calmness is the confession. After Walter was arrested, all evidence pointed to him, but he remained absolutely silent. No tears, no denials, no excuses. He just sat there, hands clasped, eyes indifferent. Everyone thought the case had closed, until someone else stepped forward. Walter's mother, Ludmila. She faced the public with a calm voice and a sentence that stunned everyone. "It wasn't my son. I am the one who killed Ekaterina." Her confession silenced the court. She said that on that day, Walter called asking her to come watch the child. When she arrived, she found Ekaterina sleeping on the sofa. In anger because her daughter-in-law wasn't taking good care of her child, she pulled her up, they exchanged words, and in a moment of rage, she accidentally strangled her to death. When they reviewed her statement, both the prosecutor and the bench didn't believe it. There were no signs of a struggle, no prints of hers on the victim. Moreover, all technical evidence, sedatives, internet searches, time of death, aligned with a premeditated act, not a fit of rage. But Ludmila stuck to her confession. She said her son was innocent, that she handled the body, and that Walter only helped dump the suitcase because he feared his mother would be implicated. It sounded like a story made to shield someone. Yet a few weeks later, when her letters to the court were released, everything became more perplexing. In evenly penned handwriting, she not only confessed but also described in detail how the body was processed, step by step, each tool, each location. She even pointed out where the remaining body parts the police hadn't found were hidden. When they checked those locations, they indeed found another bag containing part of Ekaterina's body on the outskirts near a forest edge. The question arose: if Ludmila wasn't present when Ekaterina died, how did she know so much? Technical investigation clarified the mystery once more. On the night of February 4th to the early morning of February 5th, 2022, when Ekaterina had been dead for several hours, Ludmila's phone pinged near Walter's home at 12:30 a.m. A neighbor's camera also recorded someone entering and leaving the house during the night, matching the time frame of her presence. No one but the two of them knew what happened in that house. But the alignment of time, place, and the details she provided led investigators to believe Ludmila didn't directly kill her daughter-in-law, but she was present to help her son dispose of the body. Under the dim interrogation room light, the silver-haired woman stayed silent for a long while, then murmured, "I just wanted to protect him. I am his mother. I can't let my child go to prison." A love so great it lost all reason, confusing protection with abetting, forgiveness with guilt. When the case concluded, the prosecutor determined that Walter was the killer. Ludmila was the accomplice who helped erase the evidence. But in listeners' hearts, a gap remained. The gap between the law's judgment and the judgment of human feeling. Sometimes a crime doesn't end with death. It continues to live in the hearts of those left behind, those who loved too much and understood too late. While in custody, Walter said nothing. He only wrote letters, scraps sent to his mother's workplace with the brief lines, "Only you will understand me." No one knew what they contained until 8 months later. When police brought in the investigation, they discovered location data showing that in the night of February 4th to the early morning of February 5th, 2022, Ludmila's phone appeared near her son's home at 12:30 a.m. At that moment, Ekaterina had been dead for several hours. Without many words, the data spoke for itself. She had come and been present during the disposal of the body. Ludmila had been an intellectual woman once respected, but when her son was caught, she chose to stand up and take the blame. In the first interrogation, she said firmly, "It wasn't him. I am the one who killed Ekaterina." According to her, Walter called that day asking her to watch the child. When she arrived, she found Ekaterina sleeping on the sofa. Years of pent-up anger made her lose control. She pulled Ekaterina up, they argued, and in a fit of temper, she accidentally strangled her daughter-in-law to death. The trial opened on August 26th, 2022, and lasted until May 2023. The prosecution argued that Walter had mixed sedatives into red wine, then strangled her. He had also searched about stun guns on the day of the crime. Forensics confirmed asphyxiation due to a fractured hyoid, signs of strangulation, matching the prosecution's theory. The evidence against Walter was irrefutable. More than 500 searches for how to kill without being caught. Acid to dissolve a body. How many liters of acid a bathtub can hold? Blood traces, sedatives, signs of electrical stunning, and strangulation marks on the victim's neck. False claims that his wife ran away. All combined into an undeniable verdict. Walter remained silent. No plea, no defense, not looking at anyone. The man who once controlled everything now sat in court like a mute shadow of himself. Ludmila continued to take the blame for her son, but the judges quickly dismissed it because of logical contradictions. Scientific evidence and the timeline didn't match. Her case was separated for further investigation for aiding a criminal in perjury. In the end, Walter Baumann was sentenced to life imprisonment, May 2023. Ludmila left the court in silence, walking slowly, saying nothing. Perhaps she understood she had lost everything, her daughter-in-law, her son, and the human part of herself. When the sentence was handed down, only the child remained, their little daughter, being cared for by Child Protection Services. She was still too young to understand that all those horrors began simply because love had been distorted by possessiveness. Love can be the source of life. But when love becomes power, it destroys everything, including the one who loves. In May 2023, the case ended. Walter Baumann was sentenced to life. His mother, Ludmila, was further investigated for aiding and lying. In the courtroom, no one said a word. Only the dry, decisive scratch of a pen signing the verdict was heard, like the breaking of something long past saving. Walter sat still. No justification, no sign of remorse. His empty gaze chilled the room. In the back row, Ludmila bowed her head, her figure suddenly smaller. She had once been a scientist, strong and proud. But now there was only a mother who had lost everything, her daughter-in-law, her son, and even her own soul. And the child, their little daughter, now lived in a social welfare center. She wasn't old enough to understand that her father was a murderer, that her grandmother had helped him hide the crime, that her mother, the gentle woman who once believed in love, was gone forever. She only knew how to wait, waiting for someone to return when no one could anymore. Ekaterina's story is not just a murder case. It is a warning about love distorted by power and possessiveness. She believed forgiveness could save a marriage, but sometimes forgiveness only deepens the wound. Walter killed out of fear of loss. Ludmila covered up out of fear of losing her son. But in the end, they lost everything. Justice was served, but justice cannot bring back laughter, cannot erase Ekaterina's years of fear. Only the Weather River remains, where the suitcase drifted against the current, flowing quietly as if to remind us that truth will always find its way back to the light. Abuse doesn't begin with blood, but with silence, and love, without respect, gradually becomes chains. Ekaterina is gone, but her story remains. A gentle reminder that sometimes the bravest thing is not to stay, but to leave. And that forgiveness is not to forget, but to allow the living to go on, to step out of the darkness and find a measure of light for themselves. The case of Ekaterina Baumann ends. A story not only about crime, but about the limits of love, of trust, and of forgiveness.